said, my name is Daniel Blanco, and I will be talking about the incorporation of origin and regions of provenance in the forest map of Spain, with two examples, Pinus pinaster and Passus baccata. To start with, we are going to review some key concepts. The Iberian Peninsula and the Balearic Islands are hotspots of agrarian diversity, as you already know, probably. And as such, adequate forest reproductive material, FRM, is required for a sustainable management of forest masses. Genetic differences between populations can be reflected in a practical way by the regions of provenance. RPs. According to Spanish regulation, RPs can be an area or group of areas subject to sufficiently uniform conditions for seed sources or stands to have similar phenotypic or genetic characteristics. An special case are restricted RPs, which are confinements of species to a small favorable enclaves distance from the main distribution area. You have an example for Pinus pinasters. You see the RPs, which are usually bigger in size than the RRPs. A seed source or stance is considered autochthonous when regenerated with FRM from the same seed source or stand, or from seed sources or stands located nearby. If they are not located nearby, and we know the origin of the base material, they are known as non-autochthonous of non-original FRM. And if we don't know the origin of the base material, we classify it as non-autochthonous of non-original. As in Spain, most reforestations were performed in the 40s, historical information can be accepted as an adequate source to assess reforested. Summarizing, RPs are useful to know where the FRM comes from, thus facilitating the commercialization and legalization of reforestation areas. To identify geographical limits within which seed collectors from seed sources or stands can be mixed, or also to facilitate recommendations for use, possible improvement, and conservation actions. The objectives of this work are to include origin and RP of autochthonous wooded masses into a new update of the forest map of Spain. At the same time, to update information on the distribution and origin of the forest masses using the map itself. To identify and understand the divergences between original RP maps, the registry we have, and the new forest map, and check the status of the restricted RPs. The data are many and diverse and consist of forest maps from different scales from the 60s, from the year 60s and on, to the latest version, which will be the nowadays versions, which is in a scale of 20,000, 25,000, most of it, but it's not competitive. Also, we base our work in National Forest Inventory, number 2 and number 3, from the year 80s on, and regional maps and seed sources from the regional governments, plus research and development projects and fieldwork. The methodology consists of a GRS overlay, which varies slightly depending on whether it's an agglomerative species or a divisive one. Pinus pinaster and other pines used for reforestation purposes will fit into the agglomerative species class. And for them, the masses for seed sources or stands that have similar ecological, phenotypic, or genetic characteristics are united in the same RP. Divisive species, which will be Passus baccata, and the main interest for this species will be a conservational one. For them, a territorial division is made into areas with similar ecological characteristics, which are supposed to give rise to seed sources or stands with similar phenotypic or genetic characteristics. For this species, this type of species, the GIS method takes more into account the national inventories because they record the presence of notable species besides the dominant ones. An example of result for Pinus cluster, we can see that these are good maps considering the variety of the cartographic RP sources. As such, we get an 82% of the original masses from the previous RP sources correctly identified into the new forest map. However, we need to have caution needed with some of the RRPs, which are not too well recognized into the new map. So an example of what will happen with some of the RRPs is in Serranía de Ronda, in the south of Spain, Andalusia. You see the yellow polygons are related with the previous RP maps because we know the species is there due to a specific RP stat, and the polygons of the new map have a different distribution. So in order to not lose the information, we associated the unique polygons of the new map with ancillary information, which is associated to the map through tables and make reference to the source that indicated that Pinus pinaster was there, with which range and the provenance region, so that the information is not lost. For Tarsus baccata, the forest map is designed so that it recognizes or identifies the species if it's dominant. So by default, it will be identified in a very small area compared to the area where the species is, it can be present or in a marginal way as identified by the previous RP sources or the forest inventories. So we need to associate the presence based on the inventories in order that we can correctly generate a species distribution map. Some examples of the utility of extending the new FMS maps without ancillary RP info is that, for example, thanks to new data from research projects such as Baccata Life, we can identify the presence of the species in divisive RPs where we didn't know the species was present before, which will be the case in the left, on the left. So we have a new divisive RP where the species is present, updating the information of the maps. And on the other hand, we have also here an example where all sources, even when they had the cursor scale, they had a richer floristic description of the species. So it can happen also that the new sources with higher scale or higher resolution don't describe the species, and however it's still there according to the older sources, and is also identified by regional studies. So here the species is still present. There are more in the Mallorca, in the Balearic Islands, they are more than 600 individuals that they are recovering from grazing, from coves, and above an altitude of 800 meters. So it's good to keep at the times, the other sources are still very useful, so that we correctly generate the species distribution map as well. Conclusions will be that the updating of the forestry map of space in cycles of 10 years is also provides opportunity to update the species distribution map and also to associate the origin and provenance regions to update that information too. For some of the RRPs, we cannot rely just on the forestry map itself, since it can have a different distribution of the polygons or identify only dominant species. So we use ancillary information and we associate it to the map so that it's not lost. So it's not a GIS overlay, it's also a work of interpretation, correctly associating the information when it's needed, so that is not lost. And we are expecting to make public this information associated to the FMS map soon. So that will be. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. There's time for one short question. Good morning. Okay. Well, our keynote speaker arrived, so hopefully there will be no hiccup with the presentation. Raining matches. So,
can I make a short technical interruption? Yes. Sorry, we arrived quite late, and I wanted to thank someone who has been quite important in preparing this event. As you know, we are in NISA, you have the speech of the NISA president before. But there is a lady who did most of the work to make this possible. So I would like to thank Susanna. So I brought some wine from Bordeaux.
So with you, Conceição Silva from the UNAC, from the Forest Owners Associations Federation, from Southern Portugal. Please.
Now, first of all, I would like to give you some sorry for my delay, but now it's done. I would like to thank, of course, the B4EST project organization for the invitation. Oh, thank you. For the invitation of being here today and share a little bit of the landowner's view. And I will begin explaining a little bit what is UNAC, the Mediterranean Forest Union. But what I'm bringing here is the landowner's view on the needs for the forest reproductive materials deployment for the future. Just very briefly, UNAC is a private non-governmental organization. It's a landowners organization. The main subject is to defend the interests of the landowners, the private landowners, and as currently 6-member organizations in the occurring in the south of Portugal that represent more than 2 million hectares of territory and 700,000 hectares of forest landscape. If I can move this, yes. So our activities and expertise are mainly related to technical support, to coordination and development of projects, communication and public intervention, and of course, political lobbying near to the decisors. And the no-wood forest systems are our main core in terms of activity, and I will show you afterwards why. So just some numbers, private landowners, more than 1,000 private landowners are associated area. Our local associations manage 28 intervention forest zones. It's a Portuguese tool that instead of managing at the scale of the property, allows this entity to manage at the landscape scale, which is very, very interesting. Our associations are also very involved in the FSC and PFC certification groups in order to assure the consumers that products that are sold from these farms are managed in a sustainable way, economically, social and environmental sustainable, and are also responsible for a big part of the investment of the rural development programs that exist in Portugal to support the forest investment, and also because we are in a region where fire risk is very important. We also manage private soccer teams that during the summer assure the prevention and first intervention. So this is just to show you our intervention areas. So in the blue line defines the territorial dimension of our associations that work a little bit scattered in the territory. And some of the projects where UNAC is involved or has been involved between 2018 and 2021, operational groups, H2020, technical assistance groups, and these two here on the top are the umbrella pine or salt pine breeding program and the corncob breeding program that I'm sure I will be hearing during the day of today. But most of these projects are projects that want to make the knowledge transfer from the universities, the research institutes to the landowners. So I'm not a researcher, I'm just a forest engineer, but our goal within UNAC and the research project is really to assure that what is being researched, the conclusions that are being published have an application to the management of the forest and to help our landowners in increasing the being more sustainable and also making a better management. What about our forests? I wasn't able to be here yesterday, but I don't know if you have some details on the Portuguese forest. Studies telling me that no, good. So our forest in Portugal, it's mainly a private forest. You know, 87% is private, and if we also have these 10% that are communal, that are managed by communities, we have that 97% of the forest is private. And so this is very important because all the decisions and all the changes that we want to make, of course, that need to involve all the stakeholders, and the first ones are the landowners. So the state only has 3% of the forest. Well, like a lot of countries, we suffer from rural and social desertification. Most of the people live in the cities, and we have a very fragmented land ownership. In this map, you can see in the top, in the north of Portugal, you have very small and very fragmented properties. Less than 1 hectare is the average dimension, but in the south, you still have some dimension to management. Farms with more than 500 hectares or 2,000 hectares are common in this region of Portugal. And in terms of the species, you have mainly eucalyptus and maritime pine in the north, some different oaks here, chestnut also in this part. And in the south, you have mainly in pink cork oak, and in the more near to Spain, the old oak in the light blue. Our composition in terms of forest, we have mainly eucalyptus with 29% of the forest in Portugal, followed by cork oak and maritime pine with execo, olmo oak 12% and stone pine 6%. This represents around 800,000 hectares, 700,000 hectares, olmo oak 300,000, and stone pine around 190, 200,000 hectares of forest, and these are our main species. In terms of the final goals of these forests, 53% have as a goal to produce the woods production, maritime pine and eucalyptus, but the rest of the forests are mainly non-wood forest products. They produce non-forest products. We're talking about corn, about pastures, about fruits, and this is very important because these are multifunctional systems where in the same place you have several activities going on. And this is very important in the Mediterranean ecosystems because they have small production, and so you have to pick small pieces of everything to manage to be economically sustainable. And so in the cork oak and olmo oak and also on the stone pine forests and other oaks, you can have some bigger kind of agricultural system. More and more this is going in it's not being used cereals under the trees. It's not common, but in Alentejo in the south part you still can find it. And you have some roots like honey, aromatic plants and mushrooms that are also picked in this system. You have pastures that are improved pastures or natural pastures that are used by cattle, mainly to produce meat. So you have a pasture system also, and then you have the forest system where you can obtain the cork, the pine cones, the cords, but also firewood and charcoal that are obtained from these trees. And it's this ecological system, this multifunctional system, that is very important for us because it assures a lot of ecosystem services like soil protection, biodiversity, and the carbon sink. What is the state of art of the FRM in Portugal? So the first legislation occurred in 1992 from the communitary legislation that was translated to the national legislation. It was replaced in 2003, more than 10 years after, and recently updated 3 years ago. This legislation defines what kind of species are subject to mandatory certification to be commercialized, to be able to make them give plants in good conditions and seeds in good conditions for the landowner, obliged to the registration in a national catalog of forest reproductive materials where they can be collected. We're talking about the pine cones, the science, the seeds, all the forest reproductive materials from those species that have from mandatory certification must be, those stands must be registered in the national catalog. It establishes of course, from the European legislation, it establishes also 4 different categories for these registered stands. They can be just from identified source or selected if you have some kind of phenotypical approach and selection when you choose the stands, qualified, and finally test when you have performed provenance trials and all those trials that are needed to confirm the quality and the genetic gain of the material. It also defines the minimum conditions for plants and seed commercialization, size, purity, lack of diseases. All these items are included in this legislation, and defines, of course, and in Portugal we're very, very good doing this, all the procedures, all the bureaucracy, all the documents, and they are a lot, believe me, that are needed for the plants and parts of plants commercialization. This is just to let you know the number of stands that are already registered in the catalog, these in situ certified forest seed production units. We have 262 stands registered. They represent almost 18,000 hectares, and mainly, of course, cork oak is the top one, 100 stands. Old oak and maritime pine and the Mediterranean stone pine are, well, where we have a higher number of stands and landowners that moved to these kind of registered. In terms of the different categories that are today in the catalog, this information is annually published by our national authority in forestry, ECNF. We have 623 tested stands. They are all eucalyptus tree. 169 selected stands, and in this case, these stands are scattered by all species. Qualified stands, again, stone pine and eucalyptus, and identified source stands, almost 100. Our state of art in terms of our market, our plant markets, and you can see here the last 2 years. In green, you have the species that we need the mandatory certification to be commercialized, and in blue, the ones that do not need any kind of certification. But it's a market that represents around 300 million plants. Always the numbers are very difficult. And between both of the years, we had a slight decrease in the last campaign. But these values vary a lot with the subventions from the Rural Development Plan. If we know that the next year we'll have a project to ensure and to increase the forestation and reforestation, these numbers will increase because the nurseries will produce a bigger number of plants. These ones are relatively stable because we are at the end of the rural development plan, and so there is a lot of uncertainty with the projects that will open or not, and so the nurseries are being cautious with this. About the species of those plants, and please look to the both of the axes. This is one that represents the eucalyptus. More than 50,000 plants are being produced annually, and the other species, you must read the numbers. In this side, they represent not almost 7,007. I'm not the numbers today, I'm not okay, but they represent half of the eucalyptus plants that are being produced annually. And about the part of plants, almost 22 tons of seeds, not only cords that I am showing here, but all kinds of seeds have been commercialized in this campaign. More than 500,000 of stone pine science that are used to make the grafting stone pine graphic. That is a technique that has been developed since the early 2000 years, and more than 8 million of eucalyptus cuttings that are also certified. But what about the genetic improvement programs that exist in Portugal? We have to split them in two kinds of investors and two kinds of programs. Eucalyptus, there is no doubt, the pulp industries, they lead the breeding programs for eucalyptus in Portugal since the 60s, and it's mainly a private investment. So I have a slide with some details, but the idea is to choose the best material and make the best material available, not only for the industry that manage 20% of the eucalyptus, or that owns 20% of the eucalyptus areas, but also make that material available for the landowners to use in their eucalyptus stands. And then you have all the other species where different entities, different researchers, several researchers do their investigations within the available programs. It's not as articulated and organized as it should be, and it's mainly a public investment that depends a lot on the subventions for the research to move on. These are just some of the genetic improvement and breeding programs and the entities, the responsible institutions that are working for Pinus pinaster. The improvement program objectives relate volume and steam form, resistance to Bursophylatum xylophilus, and INIAV is leading, and also resin production. INIAV is leading this kind of research. Quercus suber, the main goal is cord production, in this case by ISA. Pinus pinea, of course, the cone pine production, and not only the cone pine, but also the kernel, the amount of kernel that is obtained from each one of the cones. Castanea chestnut, rootstocks resistant to Phytophthora cinnamomum, it's very, very important in the north of Portugal. Eucalyptus pulp production, and as I told you, the two existing pulp industries, and Reis and Altri are leading this project, and other species like Rutuzonedo and Corema alb that are also being improved for food production and quality. Just briefly, eucalyptus. As I told you, in the beginning of the 60s, the two main companies that today are called the Navigator Company and Altri start these improvement programs. They select trees for seed picking based on the growth, the wood density, and the cellulose content, because the objective is to produce pulp. More than between the 70s and the 90s, more than 2,000 plus trees were identified and were also complemented with genetic material that come from other countries, from abroad. And today, those breeding programs are in the third generation, and the genetic gain is captured through vegetative propagation of the material in order to produce clones. The main goals of the breeding program, the first one, of course, was the pulp production. That's the objective of these industries. But nowadays, those goals were not substituted, of course, but were complemented with new objectives in terms of the biotic and abiotic tolerance. As you know, pests and diseases in the last years have a very huge increase all around the world, and climate change adaptation is also a need for the improvement in terms of the eucalyptus species. In terms of the maritime pine, the plus in the 60s also the plus trees were selected in Mata Nacional do Leiria, in the a little bit in the north of Portugal, and those selected trees were mainly chosen based on the height, the breast, the diameter and the breast height, the trunk and the canopy shape, and the cord wire and the health of the stems. Between the 70s and the 90s, two clonal orchards were installed in Mata Nacional do Escarpim, near where we are. Those provenance trials have also been established, and it was obtained a genetic gain in terms of the volume and the shape of the trunk. Today, also new improvement programs are redirected for biotic tolerance. The Bursophyllum xylophyllus is a big concern in Portugal for maritime pine. It entered our country in the end of the 90s, and it brought a high level of mortality to the maritime pine stands. And so it's a problem that we're aiming to solve through these improvement programs. Strong private investment came to this sector in very recently with Sonai Arauco, also an industry, with establishment of field trials where the maritime pine improved seeds are used, are compared with other pines like Pinus radiata, in order to demonstrate to the landowners the genetic gain that they can have using those improved seeds, and try to increase the production for the future. Because most of the industries in Portugal, in all sectors, we're talking about pulp, wood, but also in corn, are dealing with lack of raw material for the future years. And so those investments in seeds that are improved, that are more tolerant to pests and everything else, will increase the availability of the raw material in the future for the industry. So that's what justifies this kind of investments. In terms of the cork oak improvement program, also in the 90s, this is a small growth and also a small investment in terms of the research. Cork oak is a very difficult species to invest in terms of research, because everything takes a very, very long time to obtain some results. In Portugal, we say that when we plant eucalyptus, we plant for us. When we plant a maritime pine, it's for our children. But when we plant a cork oak tree, it's for our grandchildren. It's an investment that we only obtain the return of the money 70 years from now. So it's not for us, it's for other generations. And so in the 90s, two cork oak clonal orchards were installed. The tree selection was based on cork quality. It's the main product that is obtained and that assures the economical sustainability of this ecosystem. And also 10 provenance trials were installed with 34 provenance that came from 7 countries, and those trials were installed in different countries. And they are growing. There will be first harvest this year or next year, and all the researchers in these different countries are making the management and sharing the data that are obtained to have some results from these trials. And in 2013, the corpus genome sequencing started, and the results were published, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020. But now we still have a long pathway for the future, because now we have the genome, but what can the landowners do with the genome? We need to know what are the genes that are responsible for core quality, for biotic tolerance, and everything else. So it will take time to have some results from this. And Stone Pine Improvement Program, and I would like to show you or highlight that program is between commas, because there isn't really a program for the Stone Pine improvement, but we had some provenance trials that were installed by UNAC. My colleague Isabel, I think, will talk about this in the afternoon. And then we had clonal orchards that were installed by private landowners, two associations that I already mentioned, the association in Coruche and the association in Alcácer do Sal, that use the information that UNAC shared of the 64 plus trees that were selected in the 80s and in the 90s, and they developed projects to install these clonal orchards. But this was not an improvement program or an improvement interest in the beginning. The goal of this association was, of course, a commercial motivation of making those science of those plus trees available for the landowners to make the stone pine graftings. That was a technique that was recently developed in those times. So in more recent times, what happened is that these associations start thinking about if those clonal orchards could be interesting in terms of an improvement program, or what kind of information would they need to start taking from these areas in order to help to support some decisions about the clone to be those plus trees to be used. And as I showed you, the science of stone pines that were commercialized around 50,000 every, this is 50,000 every year from these 64 clones. And so between 2015 to 2001, those some private investments of these organizations were redirected to some research, jointly, of course, with the academia. Just very briefly, 2001, that's when those plantations of the grafted plants occurred. Grafting in the nursery, it's not very successful in Portugal. We have much more success with grafting in the field when plants have around 3 to 4 years old. So those plants that came from the nursery were again grafted in 2004, because most of the grafts died in this first stage. In 2008, we began the pine cone harvesting, and we obtained the certification in 2009 for clonal orchard and qualified material. And in 2015, we started selective thinning, and I will show you why. This is an initial installation, around 8 hectares of stone pine, some mortality areas that occurred in the 2012, and the issues were what trees should we remove in 2015 if you want to have some additional information here, a systematic thinning or a selective one. What was the relevance of these areas for the genetic improvement of pine cone production? And of course, if we could guarantee, these associations could guarantee the science supply in a shorter area. Because if you want to assess the clone productivity in terms of cone pines, we decided to stop the science in part of those trees, the ones that would be monitored a long time for the production, to understand if in these two regions of Portugal, well, clone number 1 was highly productive, or clone number 2, to see if there were differences in terms of the corn pine production among these clones. So we reserved these areas, buffer areas for science picking, and the result, we removed all the trees that were not grafted, because we had some that the graft die or the grafting wasn't successful. So all those ones were removed, just the grafted trees remain, and we split them into 2 groups. The selected trees for clonal improvement, there are 625 trees that you see here, and selected trees for science picking to allow the commercialization of the science. And since 2015, all these 625 trees are monitored in terms of the production of corn pipes. So we can know what kind of clones are more productive in this region, or Portugal, medium, or a very small production. And in 2018, also the state developed an operational program called ProGen. So it's a public administration operational program for the conservation and improvement of forest genetic resources. It only includes state areas, so private areas are mentioned, but they are not the goal of this operational program. And in 2020, in the rural development program, the first 5 projects were approved. 2 of them are already mentioned: the corporate breeding program and the stockpile also breeding program. So, but the other species, of course, maritime pine, prickly juniper, and white cranberries are also within those 5 projects. And we hope to have some results between the end of 2022 and beginning of 2023. And this comes to the last part of my presentation, that the landowner's view on the needs. So I show you the pathway that we have done until here, until today. But what do we feel that is still necessary and it needs to be done in a more articulated way? So the forests we want for the future are forests where forest and agriculture maintains the connection and the attachment. It can be a more or not so solid connection when we're talking about wood, but when we're talking about non-wood forest products, this attachment, that's what maintains the sustainability of the ecosystem. We also need, of course, for all the species, climate adaptation and mitigation concerns to address in the programs of the breeding programs, all these concerns with the future, and economic sustainability. The forest is private, economic sustainability must grow side by side with all the other concerns, social sustainability and environmental sustainability, to maintain the balance on these 3 items. And we must again split the needs or the concerns with the landowners in 2 groups. The eucalyptus, and there are industries and private investment working very well in the breeding programs. They make the information and the clones available for the landowners, so we don't need to concern. We need to maintain the contact with the industries, share the information, but it's a issue that is being very well dealt by them. And then we have all the other species. In the case of the maritime pine, also there is a lot of research in order to find some biotic tolerance to the Bursophyllus xylophilus, and so private investment again is occurring by Sonai Arauco, so that's not also our main concern. And UNAC area deals more with all the other species that you have here: corn oak, stone pine, and olmo, and that's where we really think that additional efforts are needed for the future. everyone knows about the climate change and the impact that will probably have in the Mediterranean areas. So here you can see the aggregation impact of climate change. Portugal is here, you can see highest and medium negative impact scattered in the territory. The overall capacity to adapt to climate change in this area is also very, very low. You can see low capacity or lowest capacity in the south and medium part of Portugal. And overall, the potential vulnerability to climate change is again very, very high. So our forests will struggle. They are already struggling with climate change, and we need breeding programs that address this issue in a very short term. So first of all, to the cork oak, we need to avoid this. This is a sudden death mortality. It occurs usually by the end of the summer. The trees have no more water to survive. And so during 1 week, we have from green trees like this one to completely dead trees, just 1 week. So what can we do to increase the tolerance or to establish breeding programs that choose the trees that are less sensitive to the lack of water, and to make those plants available to the landowners? Like chestnut, we cannot see here, but Phytophthora senamomi resistance or tolerance is also an issue, not only for cork oak, but also for oak. Again, we need to develop plants that are more tolerant to Phytophthora. And another issue that does not involve the death of the tree, but it's very important in terms of the commercial value of the cork. What you can see here are the defects that we found in cork sampling. That is a tool that landowners use to assess the quality of the cork and the value, the market value of the cork when they want to extract the cork. And so you can see here the cork defects are the characteristics of the cork that decrease the cork value for the landowner. And since 2002 to 2020, you can see here that most of those defects are between 0 to 5%. Sometimes they achieve 10%, but they are more or less regular and insignificant in terms of the impact in the markets. But then you have three kinds of defects that have a big impact. They are the lignified cork that has like pieces of wood that changes the characteristic of cork and the availability to use it for closures. Earthy cork, the same cork that has big holes to meet some earthy material within, and those defects are also in a trend of increasing. They represent almost 20% of the cork samplings, but the biggest concern of all the landowners is this one. It's we are calling it here a wormhole, but the name is Coroebus fundatus. Is a small bug that lives during the larval phase within the cork for 2 years. It makes huge galleries and it damages the quality of the cork. And this was more or less, or had an impact around 50 to 20%, and until 2010, 2011, it grew a lot. Now, 40% of the cork oak that were sampled annually and wormhole in the sampling. And I can tell you that every year around 60 to 70 farms are sampled for the quality of the cork. So this represents a lot. This means that a cork that could be sold 7 euros per kilo can go to 2 euros per kilo or less than that. 0.5 euros per kilo. So this has a very huge impact in terms of the commercial. And we know from an operational group that probably the hydric stress, that's what triggers this population to increase. It occurred here in 2005, and then it started increasing, then decreases, and 2017 we had again a huge drought here in Portugal, and see, it's already beginning to increase again. So again, biotic tolerance. This is cork thickness. When you talk about cork quality, we're mixing two concepts. Cork thickness is the thickness of the cork. We want to produce natural cork stoppers, so we need enough thickness to do it. If we have very thin calipers, what happens is that we can only produce discs for champagne corks or granulates, so a less valuable material. You can see here the distribution, the average distribution along the years of the average cork samples that were made. Look, 1997, 54% of the cork that were sampled was, I can see here, thick calipers, calipers that we can use to make natural cork stoppers. Look now, it has been decreased a lot, 28% in 2012, and now it's slightly increasing again. And the research tells us that this relates again to climate change. When during the 9 years of growth of cork, if you have years where you have a severe drought or extreme drought, what happens is that the cork will grow less than in a normal year. And so you will have less thick cork and more thin of those thin calipers. So which trees are less sensitive to the climate change and to the drought are the ones that should be chosen to produce a cork with higher thicknesses. And cork quality. I'm sure you don't want to have wine for an awful natural cork stopper with a lot of holes. You want to take the cork stopper from a bottle and see a beautiful cork stopper, natural cork stopper. And that is obtained here in the first to third category of cork quality. That, again, since 2008 to 2018, the trend is decreasing. Medium cork qualities, again, decreasing. And the worst ones, the ones that are mainly used to granulates for cork flooring, for shoes, umbrellas, and clothes, are increasing. But we cannot forget that this, of course, is a much less valuable material and cannot assure the economic return that the landowners need for the future management. And on oak, we need the phytophthora tolerance, as I already mentioned, resistant plants, and this ecosystem is mainly used for pastures and for cattle feeds, not only cows, but also pigs and sheep and goats. And so the highly productive trees in terms of the corns are very interesting and should be included in the breeding programs. And we want also trees that do not change a lot in terms of the production, annual production. So to reduce this masting phenomenon that occurs. And the same for the stone pine. Lactobossos entered our country in 2010. So we need lactobossos tolerant and resistant plants. Research is going on in this aspect. And also the same aim like the old oak for the pine cones. The pine, what you see here between 2015 and 2017 is the average weight of the pine cones in these two different years in terms of the availability of water. And each one of these represents one of the 64 blocks that I mentioned. And we can see just in these 2 years that you have clones that even with different availability of water, they perform the same in terms of the average weight of the pine cones. And you have clones that suffer a lot from the lack of water in these years. So probably we should look to these ones that are here in orange, highlighted in orange. We should look to these ones and see a long time if they perform the same way, because they may be the ones more interesting for the future. And also to reduce the masting phenomenon, this is production in one farm in Coruche from 1995 to 2007. See, how can the landowner have some kind of management program when you can have almost no pine production, corn pines, a year perfectly different from all the others. So you have all these fluctuations, and so a more regular production would be also of interest. So my final acknowledgements, I need some help because I'm not an expert in reading from all of these colleagues that send me some information. Thank you for all of them. And thank you, of course, for your attention.
Well, obrigado for this quite wide panorama of forestry and agroforestry in Portugal. I'm sure there will be some question for Conceição. Of course, Catherine is coming down. Proud to present. Come down. Microphone.
Thank you so much for this view of what is the challenge expressed by the private owners and also the public states. So my question is, it's not clear that in this opinion, people are afraid of the future. So they express needs, but do you think they are optimistic or very pessimistic for the future? First question. The second question, I think they are still optimistic because they address question to tree breeder, thinking that there will be option within species genetic variation to find challenges. And for this point, do you have an idea of what is the mind of forest owner regarding replacing of species in the area? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. For the first one, landowners are still available to invest in forests, but I cannot say that they are optimistic, mainly in the south of Portugal, because the scenario is very dramatic and they see that they are losing cork production every time. Cork is harvested from 9 to 9 years, and every time that they harvest, they lose 10 to 20% of the amount of cork that they had from the previous extraction. And this occurs by two drivers. One is the lack of trees, or tree mortality, and the other one is the decrease of the cork thickness that, of course, leads to less quantity. And in the old sector, again, it's not a very good perspective because you don't have a return that comes directly from the trees. The return comes from the pastures and from the cattle. And so when you manage, you're mainly managing for the agricultural and the pasture driver and not for the forest. And so you have, again, like losing trees every time that you make the forest inventory. So they are available to invest. They are still investing. All the rural programs have a lot of projects that the landowners go and use to make the forest investments, but they are very worried with the future. Oh, about the first questions. Second one, just remember me. The question is what is their opinion regarding replacing? Okay, so you're touching a very important point in Portugal because cork oak and olmo, they represent almost 1,000 hectares of forest in Portugal. 1/3 of the forest are protected species. So when you're making planting a new area of cork or olmo, you must know that you'll never be able to change it to another species. So this is a very big imposition that the state turns to the landowners, and they cannot change, even if it's going bad, the trees are dying, and you are producing a very bad cork, and for example, stone pine grows better in that area, or even eucalyptus, you cannot replace it. You have to stick with the cork oak and olmo until the end. And the landowners, of course, they would like to change in these cases where the culture is not already viable and they are dealing with these problems every day. They would like to change it, but it's not possible. Just to give you an example of the eucalyptus, sometimes in the middle part of Portugal, but probably it occurs all over the way, when you have eucalyptus areas with 40 years, 50 years, and some of the landowners want to cut and want to replace it by cork oaks. And that in those areas, you have very high rates of survival of the cork oaks. And if you make a plantation in a nearby area that was cleaned, not with the eucalyptus, you have survival rates that are very, very low. I'm talking about 20% or 30% of survival rates comparing to the eucalyptus areas. Then you cut and you plant cork oaks and you have 70 to 80%. So the rotation of the species is something that landowners would like to do in order to some way recover the potential of these oaks, but it's not possible. And unfortunately in Portugal, we have a big environmental lobby against the eucalyptus, and that avoids this kind of revolutions or rotations.
Okay, a last question before we go forward.
Answer from here.
It is.
Thank you very much for a very nice presentation. When we hear about the forces of inflation fires, and clearly you cannot be too much against forest fires, but is there a shift in species selection or species composition? What is your expectation of what is changing in forests as a consequence of these fires, and what are the implications for the tree?
Fires in Portugal are mainly a problem of landscape management and the way that forest species are mixed with each other. Because in the south you have very high temperatures during the summer and very small amounts of humidity, but the size of the park still allows the landowners to manage in a profitable way and to decrease the fire risk. When you go to the north, where the property is a very small area, and of course that the landowners want to get the highest profit from those areas. That's fair. They want to survive like all the others. And so the most suitable trees are, of course, the eucalyptus and the British pine. But they need to be managed and scattered in the landscape in a way to decrease the fire risk. They need to be compartmented. Some compartmentation must occur with species that have smaller fire risks. We need to maintain some agricultural areas between the forest areas instead of harvesting, instead of foresting everything. But this takes time, of course, and this must be defined as a priority, because we cannot forget that those landowners need also to have some forest income. It's it's fair for them. So states need to in those forest intervention zones that I was telling you are able to make this landscape management and to address the best areas for specific species. But then you must share the profit you have between the landowners. So that's the pathway that is needed to do.
Once again, thank you. We must move on to the other presentations. So the next speaker is Esteban Torres Sanchez from Luisan from northern Spain, on maritime pine. Yes.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm going to talk about the Galician breeding program for Pinus pinaster. Some of the results that we have observed in this last job, and about it is possible to select according to wood quality and growth variables in Pinus pinaster. So first of all, in the 80s, a breeding program for Pinus pinaster was created, and several trees were selected through the Galician coast according to the variable traits such as height, diameter, bark thickness, and stem form. Moreover, during the following years, several experimental trials and seed orchards were planted, and currently, for this job, we are working with 116 families, 2 provenances, and 1 commercial seed lot as genotype represented in 5 experimental trials. Those experimental trials which were planted in 1995 are represented as yellow triangle, Lalin and Gomezende, and the other 3 experimental trials which were planted in 2005 are represented as green triangle. So at the, for 1995 experimental trials, at the age of 22 years, we have measured 2 variables related to wood quality. The first variable was the modulus of elasticity, and the second was basic density. Then for 2005 experimental trials, we have measured the same variables related to wood quality, and we have also measured variables related to growth, such as slenderness, straightness, and volume. For this last 1 variables, volume and slenderness was derived from height and diameter, and straightness was measured on a 6-level scale, being 1 the straightest tree and 6 the worst tree. So it is important to remark this because, as we can see in the next slides, the lower value of straightness, the better the tree is. So this is an example of 1 experimental trial planted in 2005 at this age of Rebordelo. To analyze our data, first of all, we were looking for spatial autocorrelation for each variable at each age and in each experimental trials. And when we found it, we corrected thanks to the iterative spatial analysis. Once we have corrected it, we grouped our experimental trials in 2 major groups. The first one was formed with those experimental trials planted in 1995, whereas the other group was formed with those experimental trials planted in 2005. Then we performed a mixed model for both groups, where the site was considered as fixed effect, the genotype was considered as random effect, and interaction was considered also as random effect. With the block of this mixed model and the phenotypic values of original data set, we have calculated genotypic correlation and phenotypic correlation among variables. Finally, the same analysis was performed for 2005 group, but only with those families in common between 1995 and 2005 in order to obtain some blocks to calculate juvenile mature correlation for modulus of elasticity and basic density. Regarding our results, first we can see that the wood quality traits increase with the age, and then we have find that genotype was significant for all variables at each year, and the size was also significant. However, we have find no significant interaction genotype side for all variables except for the volume. Finally, the reactivity of wood quality variables were higher than the activity of growth variables. About variable correlation, in yellow are represented phenotypic correlation and in green genetic correlation. And we can see that modulus of elasticity and basic density are positively and significantly correlated between them. And on the other hand, and unfortunately, volume was negatively correlated at phenotypic level to wood quality traits. about our juvenile mature correlation, we have a higher values for both variables of wood quality. And in both graphics, each point represents a specific family. And we can observe that those families which have a high ranking at the age of 12 years, continue having a high ranking, a high value at the age of 22 years. So it's because of this that we suggest that early selection for both variables, it is possible in Pinus pinaster. One more thing, scale values are with in units of the transformation of each mixed model in order to achieve normality and homotheisticity. And then selecting by the best family according to this function. First of all, we have observed that selecting by models of elasticity, we have involved two situations. The first, we have a higher increment of modulus of elasticity. However, the volume could be negatively affected. On the other hand, if we select by basic density, we could have an improvement of all variables. In that case, straightness has a negative value because for us, the lower the value is, the better the tree. And finally, selecting by modulus by good quality traits at the age of 22 have a similar results that if we select at the age of 12 years. But we have another option to make an improvement of this variable. In that case, this graph represents the relation among blues, among volume and good quality traits. So I have represented in red point those families which showed a positive value for all of these variables. The other points has positive values on some variables, but not for all. There are in some variables that they have a negative value. So finally, for example, other option is selecting those families. We could have an improvement of all of these variables. Finally, as a final conclusion, selecting families of interest to improve good quality with no growth loss is possible. Selecting good quality at an early stage is promising due to juvenile mature correlation, and the percentage of improvement in all variables varies depending on selecting by MOE or basic density. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
And for questions. Please.
Yes, maybe I missed the comment. Did you use multiple traits in this model, or was it a single trait?
Can you repeat, please?
Did you use multiple traits in this model, or was it a single trait in this model?
A single trait needs model.
Okay.
So each variable was measured, in alone. This variable. Yeah, it's a single.
Used multiple traits in order to get, for instance, the better estimates of the genetic correlations instead of using experiment correlation.
I don't perform a mixed model for all variables because, well, first of all, I think that I haven't got enough knowledge to perform this analysis and to interpret this data. So I perform as well as I can with a single mixed model.
The question is how close we work in terms of the runs of the
Okay, please, I can understand with the microphone.
We don't.
Okay. How close are you working with the other breeding programs in France and Portugal?
We are working. We are searching about the other breeding program for France and Portugal, but at the end we are working by ourselves. We have read about the other breeding programs, but at the end we are working by ourselves. I don't know if I respond you. I answered you.
Well, maybe exchange with material from Portugal might be problematic just now for the pinewood. We must move on to the next presentation. It's from Thomas from Silava. So please.
Hello. My presentation will be about use of various lighting conditions in regards to propagation of hybrid aspen clones. So, as it already was discussed, one of the options for production of forest reproductive material is use of high quality, fast growing taxa, high quality genotypes of fast growing taxa such as hybrid aspen in case of Latvia, and for production of the genotypes, one most commonly used practice is propagation by in vitro techniques, which offer both higher propagation rates and regarding the breeding process, it can speed it up quite nicely. One of factors that affect plant growth in these in vitro conditions is light. And for this purpose, artificial luminaries are usually used. And in last decades, LED luminaries are becoming more and more popular for this purpose. However, regarding hybrid aspen, effects of light have been rarely studied. Therefore, aim of this study was to test how these cultures performed under luminaries with different spectral composition and intensity. So to do this, we used already established in vitro cultures of 4 hybrid aspen clones, and we cultivated them under 3 different spectral compositions. And for each spectral composition, we also used 3 different light intensities. Spectral distribution looked like this. As you can see, top right and both figures on bottom, LED treatments were based so that these maximum emission peaks were in accordance with absorption maximum of photosynthetic apparatus. On the other hand, fluorescent light, which is on top left, it had distinguished, it was distinguished from other treatments with high intensity of orange light. However, red light amount was significantly reduced compared to these LED treatments. Experimental setup looked like this. We installed such 4 vertical growth systems with each shelf system representing different light treatment, and each shelf was different light intensity. And after 4 weeks of cultivation, we determined morphological and physiological parameters of plants. So according to the results, as you can see, they formed up quite nice groups according to light intensities. On the left figure, 30 micromoles were similar to 70, and 70 were similar to 110, but 110 was a bit different from 30 micromoles. At the same time, spectral composition had quite similar results. Only fluorescent lamps had some slight differences in comparison to treatments. Therefore, yes, the emphasis of this presentation will be next interpretations will be more on this intensity part. According to PCA results, we also reduced the amount of variables for examination, and we chose 6 parameters that were later on interpreted. And also I wanted to mention that we did not include in this PCA analysis results of relative chlorophyll content. However, it will be also later on, as you will see. And according to results, the effect of intensity and spectrum was significant on all examined variables. However, in some cases, this effect was clone specific, and accordingly, further interpretation was done based on this table, either on clone level or factor level. So first we have fluorescence parameters, which basically showed and were used as relative stress indicators. And what we saw that under elevated intensities, plants exhibited faster kinetics of fluorescence and also reduced vitality, which is indicated by a figure on the right, by a performance index, which was lower compared to this lower intensity. Similar results were observed for efficiency of photosystem 2, which had reduced efficiencies under elevated intensities. And also this relative chlorophyll content was reduced under increasing intensities, while mean leaf area, it had the opposite effect, and on the higher intensities, this average leaf area was higher compared to lower intensities, which was consequently lower. So about shoot elongation, as you can see, also plants under lower intensities formed longer shoots, consequently, formed longer internodes and consequently longer shoots. However, in this case, there could arise a question about etiolation or due to insufficient light. But as you can see in the picture, yes, on the left is the lowest intensity and in increasing order. As you can see in the left jar, plants formed quite normal. They didn't have these white shoots or like well, in short, they seemed more or less normal plants. They didn't form these anomalies that could be observed in case of etiolation. At the same time, it must be mentioned that under these lower intensities, at least 40 to 50% of plants had necrotic shoot tips, probably due to a loss of apical dominance. However, I would like to say we turned this defect into effect, and the use of these necrotic ships was in the case that we cultivated one cycle on this low intensity. Plants formed these necrotic shoot tips. However, at the same time, this decrease of apical dominance increased formation of lateral shoots. Therefore, we were able to get higher multiplication indexes. And we tested this in further propagation cycles and got that if you combine these lower intensities with higher intensities, that you can get, you basically get higher multiplication index, and in the next propagation cycle, you can return these plants to like normal state without these necrotic shoot tips. And by combining these you can have increased multiplication indexes. And yeah, in general, these lower intensities seem to promote shade avoidance response in plants, which were expressed as higher photosynthetic system efficiency, and plants basically also invested more energy into forming longer shoots, which is also, as I already said, better in case of propagation. I assume I have some bit more time, so I will also tell a bit about these spectral effect of spectral parts. So these results, they actually are a bit on level of speculation. However, we observed that these fluorescence kinetics and overall vitality was reduced in case of, in one clone, in case of use of these fluorescent tubes, which had reduced red light, indicating that sufficient amount of red light is necessary for normal plant growth. And also, in terms of shoot growth, additional spectral regions like yellow and green color should also be added if you want to have a higher propagation rates. So yeah, regarding this spectral composition, short summary would be that you should use basically luminaries with wider spectral range, and also take into account the amount of red light, which apparently is necessary in sufficient amount. And along with these positive effects of LED luminaries, if not for the worst, then at least you can get the same results as with using these traditionally used fluorescent lamps. So thank you.
For the insight in ecophysiology of hybrid aspen. We're a little bit out of time, so I would ask Paul Seltins from the Slava 2, and maybe we can do the questions after the coffee break.
Yes. Okay. So hello everyone, and I'm from Research Institute Silva from Latvia, and I would like to tell a bit about our attempt to model height growth of young stands of Scots pine and silver birch in Latvia. So a little background: as you all know, growth yields and tables and functions, it's a common practice to predict growth of the trees, and it's used to plan silvicultural activities, as well as evaluate the different alternatives of management or production and carbon sequestration and so on. But the fact is that mostly these empirical models which are used, they are based on data which comes from, so we can say, unimproved trees from unimproved stands. Some comes even from the middle of 20th century. So here may arise a concern that there may be some potential underestimations of this height and whatever growth of these trees if these genetic gains are not incorporated in these models. And the fact is that in our Baltic Sea region, we have these genetic gains estimated to be 10 to 25%, depending on the improvement level for our 3 species, which are important in forestry. So our objective was to develop and to test new growth functions for Scots pine and silver birch for improved forest reproductive material categories qualified and tested. And why these species? Firstly, they are good examples of commercially important coniferous and deciduous species in the region. And also these both species has quite well history of tree breeding of selection in Latvia since the middle of 20th century. And the most important thing is that we have enough data to do this thing for improved trees, because that's usually is a problem for such species in Northern Europe, which has longer rotation periods, that we don't have enough data to model something. So we need to modify the already existing ones. So a little bit about materials. We used data, so height measurements from open pollinated progeny trails across whole Latvia for these both species. And we assigned the category tested for the 10% of best performing families in these trails. So remaining 90% were left qualified. And of course, we needed to use only trails which had at least twice remeasured height for these trees. So we had in total 14 progeny trails. And the age range was from 3 to 46 years for pine and 10 to 22 for birch, which roughly covers this young stands according to typology in Latvia, which is up to 50 years for Scots pine and up to 20 years to silver birch. So a little bit about modeling approach. We use dynamic modeling, so this is called generalized algebraic difference approach. Firstly, we tested a couple of commonly used base models, and we found that the dynamic equation of Chapman-Richards fits the best to our data. So our approach was to have a set of these coefficients, B or beta 1, 2, and 3, which are forest reproductive material specific. So we had so basically we had 2 sets of these coefficients for both categories. And yes, this model had the best fit for the both species. So some results. Firstly, Scots pine. Here you can see in this main graph these growth curves for both categories. So orange one is qualified and the green one is tested. And 10 years is chosen as a base age, because this is roughly the time when the first evaluation is done in progeny trails. So the best material is selected there. And these curves has a step of 1 meter covering this empirical data range, which is in light blue color in the background. So you can see that category tested is slightly above the category of qualified, which is logical, but mostly these curves are parallel. So it means that basically, even without distinguishing these 2 categories, this model would perform also very well. The statistics are also rather good, so there are no obvious trends in residuals, and the model efficiency is also quite high, so 0.98 roughly for both fitting and validation data. And for silver birch, we can see that comparing to Scots pine, there are more distinct differences between categories. So this tested growth faster, especially on these lower site indices, at least in these progeny trails from which empirical data comes. But also we can see that this model accuracy is a bit lower than for Scots pine, although there are also no trends in residuals. And I would like also to add 2 more slides, which is, I would say, preliminary analysis. I try to incorporate some climate indices into this model, and I did it for Scots pine. And for this purpose, I used B4EST climate downscaling tool. I tested these climate indices there, which would have the strongest effect on this height increment, and then I incorporated these climate indices in front of this unknown environmental effect part in this dynamic model. So this beta3 was substituted with linear function, which includes this example 2 climate indices. So it's mean temperature of warmest quarter and precipitation of the coldest quarter. And some results are that you should believe me, I didn't put statistics there, but this model, it had significantly better fit, and so it had a better prediction capacities. And without these climate indices, and here you can see these differences separately for each category, for qualified and for tested. So it seems that, these function with climate indices, there are more, maybe these curves are a bit straighter for these lower side indices, seems so. So some concluding remarks. As result shows that these functions which are developed solely from this data of improved trees, they predict the tree height growth quite well for both species. And I would like to highlight that actually it seems that this is quite easy way how to do it, to have it a set of coefficients separately for 2 forest reproductive material categories. And it is quite easily applicable for practical use, because forest owners, forest managers, they usually know what categories they are planting in their forests. And yes, so these categories separately, more precisely, can reflect the actual growth of improved trees. And this incorporation of climate indices, it improves the prediction accuracy, and in this case, it may help to explore potential impact, for example, of changing climate when we use such functions in, for example, some decision support tools. But this, in our case, will be further analysis. So, as I said, this is only preliminary results of this climate indices incorporation. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you for this modeling exercise. That's something we were talking about yesterday, that maybe that might be an interesting improvement or way to explore for all this ecologic niche or species distribution model. Not to say just the height at 10 or 15 years, but to explore the growth curve by itself as a property to be modeled depending on the climate envelope. So quite interesting. We will have a coffee break and we'll be back at 11 o'clock. So maybe there's some short question to the 2 colleagues from the last 2 talks.
To get our questions. In your graphs, it seems like the selected stocks were having parallel line over the less stocks, which suggests that the percentage term genetic gains will be reduced over time. So genetic gains estimated at 10 years will be in relative terms more than the genetic gains at 35 years. Is this validated by the genetic trials? Is this the perception that the genetic trials have? And the second question is, do you also have that if you run this modeling for volume?
Or what?
For volume or for diameter or basal area?
Okay, thank you for questions. Answer to first question is that yes, it wasn't validated to another trails. We divided this data from these trails, like roughly 70% were used for fitting the model and 30% were used for validating it. And so yes, basically that's about these parallel curves. And for the second question, no, this is the first stage of this work. So I did height growth modeling. So yes, volume should follow, but there are no results yet for this.
The divergent pattern will come out when we use volume.
Yeah, because we also have this experience that height, it has, if we look at diameter, volume and height, the height has the lowest gains in terms of percentage.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then let's have a coffee break, okay? And back at 11 o'clock. Tenemos costumbre.
Un petit café.
It's not a great time now. If you can hear me, can you try to speak?
Is this? No, is this working? No. This was supposed to work. Is this connected? I have used this before. What? No process. I just have exams to correct, oral exams to make. So I have to finish corrections and yeah, just. They say that the other microphone doesn't work, but they recommend not to use it.
It doesn't take so.
But if we move one of this. We move one of this here. And people speak from. I think, I'm never sure if others can hear me. No.
Nice.
I don't know.
Oh, yes.
If we use the pointer, speech, because the other guy was moving slides with his finger, yeah, there. And if the person stands here, it's back, but he can look. And he has a better view of the.
Actually, they can.
Yeah.
And I think that for the presentation, they can use
And
fun to just be able to move
And then we can answer.
Yes, yes. It's a good idea. I need to deal with some. Sorry.
Is it working?
Yes. For you, then. La précipitation, c'est ça, le test. Oui, c'est parce que la posture est un peu.
J'entends très très mal, hein. C'est très loin et très haché. Avec, en fait, j'ai l'impression que c'est un cachalot ou une baleine qui me parle, pour être exact.
Normalement, ça va bien mieux quand on mettra la session. Ça se rend un talk de.
Ok.
On va tester le son. On peut dire en
Ok, bah, on verra quoi. Vous m'entendez bien?
Tout à fait, très bien.
Et
Ok.
la vidéo?
C'est juste très brillant de voir ça.
Juste peut-être lui dire qu'on peut pas, on pourra pas lui montrer et la salle et elle.
Est-ce que tu peux essayer de.
En fait, ce qu'on peut lui montrer, c'est ça. Ou ça, tu vois. Genre la petite. Ah, la caméra 2 marche un peu. La 3 qui est ici. Et en fait, on peut pas. Si nous, on veut voir les têtes des gens, ben, on est obligé de mettre ça et du coup, ils sont obligés de voir ça aussi, tu vois.
Ce qui se passera, c'est qu'on n'affichera tout voilà, vos têtes à l'écran. Ça ressemble dans la salle. On est un peu en retard sur le planning. On s'est fait là encore 20 minutes de passion par un max.
Welcome back to the room. Now we will pass to the second part, results, what your reader can tell you. Mats will talk about Nordic planters guideline. So please.
So, hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mats Berlin. I work at the Forestry Research Institute of Sweden, Skogforsk, and I am a VP leader. And we've been presented with a lot of interesting results and conclusions from the previous presentations. My idea here is to present a way of getting this knowledge to forest owners and forest managers. And one of the ways of doing that is to use tools or decision support. And I will present decision support developed for the Nordic countries called the Planters Guide. And of course, there are a lot of people who have been collaborating to develop these tools. I just wanted to start with giving you the context, because forestry is quite different across Europe. The Swedish forestry, which I'm presenting here, is fairly similar to the forestry in the Nordic countries. There are, of course, differences, but the scale and the main message is the same. So we harvest quite a lot of forest in Sweden, some 90 million cubic meters per year. And we are final felling some 200,000 hectares per year. Thinning is about the same every year. And actually, almost 90% of the regenerations are by planting. And Norway spruce and Scots pine are the two absolute biggest species. You can see the graph here that last year we were planting some 450 million seedlings, approximately the same amount shared with Scots pine and Norway spruce. This is the pink and blue line there. And as you can see, the other species are very, very small in comparison. So Norway spruce and Scots pine are by far the biggest species. And when we talk about these species, almost all of these planted seedlings originate from seed orchards, that is improved forest reproductive material. As you can see, the pink line here is Scots pine, it's almost 100%. And the blue line is Norway spruce. It's not really 100%. You can see that there's been a trend, an upward trend, which was broken around 2010. And that was not because demand was too low. It was because the seed supply was too low. And Norway spruce, as you know, maybe is a masting species and has irregular flowering. And the crops were also damaged by insects and fungus some of these years. So, but now we have had a couple of good years of seed production, as you can see, the curve is moving up again. So a lot of the seedlings, almost all of them, are from improved material, seed orchards. And what about the seed orchards then? There are not just 1 or 2 or 10 seed orchards that we can choose from. There are approximately 40 active Norway spruce seed orchards and 70 Scots pine seed orchards commercially available in Sweden today. And each of these seed orchards have a different level of genetic gain and an adaptation profile. Of course, some are very, very similar. But I just wanted to show you that these seed orchards have a huge variability. The graph here, or the map here to the right, is the number of defined seed zones in Sweden, which I think this was for Scots pine. Doesn't matter, it's the same for Norway spruce in the amount, about 10 different defined seed zones. So given this big variability, of course, you need some kind of decision support when selecting the seed orchard for your regeneration. And that's where Planters Guide come in. And just to connect to some of the results we've been seeing mostly yesterday, The Planter's Guide, you can see it as a platform. It's research and implementation at the same time. And it is based on this kind of idea of building these universal transfer models, these transfer effect models. And of course, we've used quite a lot of common garden data, but also data from progeny trials. And then we have all of this climate data, which has also been quite nicely presented earlier. And we have built these models for both growth and survival. But in order for these models to actually come to use for forestry, we have to translate them into some kind of deployment recommendations for the seed orchards. So we have to add some kind of characteristics of the seed orchards, a database from the seed orchards, but we also have to take into account the rules and regulations that the countries actually have. If this tool is to be operational and used by forestry. So the two tools I will show you very briefly are called the Planter's Guide, but it's also another version of Planter's Guide, which has an optimization part. And the end users are different for these two tools, but the background and the models are the same. So the Planter's Guide tool, it's a web-based decision support tool, and it's been hosted by Skogforsk, the Forestry Research Institute of Sweden so far. It's openly available. We've built it so that it's platform independent. That means that you can use a laptop, you can use an iPad, you can use a smartphone, and the tool will look nice in each of these different platforms. It's a very simple interface, simple for the end users. It's based on Google Maps, so you can simply select a generation site by clicking in the map, or you can enter the coordinates. And I've used this Norway spruce beta version as an example here. So what happens when you click on the map and you select the button, show me the deployment recommendations? You see that the seed orchards that are considered to be producing well at that site, they are presented in a list and they are ranked according to their predicted performance at that site. And we have also given local unimproved stand as a reference. In this case, the reference is given as the number 100. And in this case, 120 means that the seed orchard performs 20% better in volume growth than a local stand. And as you can see, in this case, there are seed orchards from both Sweden, Norway, and Finland at the same time presented here. Climate scenarios can be changed. The 4 RCP scenarios that we've been hearing about earlier here, you can choose either one of them, and the ranking will be changed dynamically when you do that. You will also be given some of the key climatic drivers for the universal response function model at the site. So that was the basics of the Planter's Guide tool. The optimization tool is, and the Planter's Guide tool is mostly used site by site. You take one site at the time. You want to have recommendations for one site. So mainly small forest owners use the Planter's Guide tool. But we have a lot of big forest companies and forest owner associations in our countries, in the Nordic countries as well. And they are not really, the tool is not really well suited for actors with large forest holdings, which often also have nurseries so they can produce plants. They are faced with the fact that they have many regeneration sites every year, and they have access to many of these different seed orchard crops, but each with a limited amount of seed available. So we built a new interface based on their requests that they could have the many sites and seed orchards simultaneously. But we added the functionality of optimizing the use of this limited seed on their sites so that we could maximize total mean annual growth. And this is also, this is also an openly available web tool, but it's a little bit more tricky as you have to add text files with your sites and your seed crop availability before you run the tool. But the output looks like the following. It optimizes given this input data, and it gives you a gain in volume production over the entire holding. it also gives you the seed crop utilization. As you can see, some of these seed crops or seed orchards have been completely utilized and some have not been utilized at all. And you also can look at it from a geographical point of view. How will these seed orchards be deployed? So different colors in this case on the map represents different seed orchards. So where are we at with this Planter's Guide platform right now? We have an operational version of the Planter's Guide platform, but we also have a beta version, which has been developed during B4EST. So for Scots pine, we have a common Planter's Guide tool for Sweden and Finland, and also the optimization tool is available for both countries. And we have a beta version tool of Scots pine where Norway is included as well. For Norway spruce, we started from scratch, I can say, in B4EST when developing this tool. So still, we only have a Swedish version operational for this Planter's Guide and the optimization tool. The beta version instead has all the Nordic countries, including actually the Baltic countries as well. The operational tool only has one scenario, and it only is built on national climate data, so it's limited. And that's why we now, in the beta version tool, have all these 4 RCP scenarios. We have European scale climate data. And I would also like to tell you a bit more about uncertainty maps in the end of this presentation. So the challenges ahead for this tool are on a different number of issues. First of all, we have to agree on, if you want to have the tool common across country borders, we have to have seed orchard definitions that all can agree on. For example, genetic gain, how we calculate the origin of the seed orchards, pollen contamination, and different kind of questions that come up with the characteristics of the seed orchards. But I would like to say that a lot of work has been done, not least in B4EST, and actually we have come a far way for a common system for the seed orchard definitions. So we're far ahead there, I think. And then we have the national rules and legislations or regulations. Each country has its own set of these rules and regulations, and they might be quite different actually. But I think we have experiences from Scots pine with the Swedish-Finnish tool that there are positive contacts now with formal authorities that actually allows us to use Finnish seed orchards in Sweden and Swedish seed orchards in Finland, now with formal authority approval. So we're getting somewhere there as well, but it's still a challenge. But I would like to talk a little bit at the end of my presentation about handling the effect of climate change in this kind of tool, because I believe it's a major challenge that we have to face. And I would like to talk about climate change variability. Of course, I guess you're all aware of the fact that we have different RCP scenarios, which all represent different amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and result in different levels of global warming in the end. In this case, you can see all the scenarios here represented by the solid lines. However, for each of these scenarios, there are several GCMs or RCMs, these kind of global climate models that are downscaled and parameterized for each RCP to correspond to this scenario. And these are made by different climate institutes all around Europe and the world. And these introduce a variability around the RCP scenario, which is illustrated here by the arrows. And in our case, we have access to 5 GCMs per scenario for our analysis. And that, if you look at it that way, you can say that for each scenario, you can actually have a variability in the predicted forest reproductive material performance and optimal deployment area. This is just a conceptual illustration of what it could look like with different GCMs within the same RCP scenario. So how do we deal with this variability? Well, we have developed methods to do that within B4EST, and I would just like to do the concepts of those. Because deals with a lot of data, huge amounts of data. We have developed an automatic tool to generate these kind of uncertainty maps. I will explain them a little bit later. But it took some time for us to grasp what the best and most efficient way of dealing with this was. And we believe it is this kind of tool. The current way we are doing this in Landowners Guide is actually using the ensemble average. I think it is a fairly common way of dealing with climate change. You take the ensemble average of these different GCMs and you make an RCP from that. That's also the way that Landowners Guide works today. But then you have no possibility really to analyze or evaluate the variability in predicted performance, some kind of risk management when doing this. And in this case, the map is for a seed orchard for RCP 4.5, and the greener or the darker the color is, the better this seed orchard performs compared to a local provenance. So you can see that it has this core area where it is a bit darker and an area where it produces not so good or goes to the end of its core area where it's lighter green here. Well, the same map for the same orchard, but using what we call, well, we can call it the majority vote. Now we're not doing an ensemble average first and then calculating the performance. We're calculating the performance for each of the GCMs. And then we're adding them together to have a kind of uncertainty map. In this case, we have set thresholds for performance classes. If the seed orchard is, if all or a majority of the GCMs say that this seed orchard is 20% better than a local provenance, you get the darker green color. Another threshold was between 10 to 20%, a green color, 0 to 10%, a light green color. So you can see if you go back to the other map, it's kind of the same map, but a different message. So it allows us to look at this variability in another way. And in this case, we have some other restrictions as well. The bluish color is about when you have the survival below 50%. So it's it's a test actually of that kind of restrictions. Another version would be to look at the coefficient of variation. So in this case, each predicted performance is calculated again for each GCM, but then we're calculating the coefficient of variation between the GCMs for this predicted performance. And now you can see that the dark green is represented by a low coefficient of variation. That is, the variability is low, which is good in a sense. And then the light green is a high coefficient of variation, where the variability is large between the GCMs. So this is another way of producing these kind of maps. So the question is, which map to choose then? Well, it's not really my job as a scientist to decide which map to choose. It's the end users. So we are presenting a number of different maps. I just showed you two. We have several more here. We believe that this allows for the decision makers to take into account this kind of risk in another way than just using the ensemble average. And we are already starting to have this group of stakeholders and end users to have interaction with them, presenting them these maps, asking them what kind of way they want us to illustrate this variability or uncertainty. So we have started these meetings within the realm of B4EST. We will probably continue even after B4EST. So, oh, sorry. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I see you.
I have a question more to understand better the magnitude of this uncertainty that you talked about. For a predicted gain from that project, could you just tell me a little bit more what's the magnitude of the of the lack of fit, right, that you would expect from sea orchards. What's the magnitude of this risk? I couldn't understand it. It's a very large risk that we take. Those colors represent the largest risk, means that we could have that seed, or it's just a minor difference between the expected gains of prudence and the actual scale of this.
No worries, it was probably quite fast run through, but I mean, it's really also a way of letting the end user decide, because in this case, the majority vote, if you have, in the case of the majority vote maps, you saw that the dark green color was 20% better, which is kind of what you maybe aim for one of these more modern seed orchards. And in this case, 3 or more of the GCMs agree that you would have 20% better performance. But if you are more risk averse, you can set that number to 5. So 4 agree. And then you will have a smaller area of this dark. Analyze that in full. So I can't really tell you about. Yes, okay, so I won't go into the details about the modeling too much. I can tell you that as for all these universal response function models, they are almost always exclusively based on stats. But we have done some additional calculations to ensure that the model structure or the model curve form actually works for the food material by including progeny trial data as well. But I don't think I will go into the details too much here, but yes, they are adapted so that they can actually predict performance of improvement.
Okay, thank you. Very short one, last question, but short question, short answer. Because yes, I will be online.
Sorry, to read question. Considering the user of expectations, what's the type of user it's quite thick, and often let's say the understanding of uncertainty and uncertainty the climate on a city, how is the user which that you're aiming at? Maybe it's
uncertainty is this kind of uncertainty or variability is tricky to handle. I think I mean we could do the way we've done so far by just using ensemble averages, but I think it's we present this option for the end user to actually take this variability into account in some way, and we'll see how they respond. So far, they've been quite interested in looking at that. We're just scratching at the surface of this kind of analysis now. So I think we have lots of work to do. But yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lücke. We will now start with a round table, and we have invited 4 panelists. Juva Akarain is from Finsilva. He's a managing director of Finsilva. So we have someone for private forest. We will have Brigitte Munschmann from the National Office of Forest in France. So forest management, associates from the Research and Development Department. We count on Felipe Perez from the Spanish Ministry of Environment and Population Challenges, and Christopher Horacio from the Institute of European Forest, European Institute of Planted Forest. maybe you will stay down because we will start with Juha. He is online, so you can see the presentation. Juha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Perfectly. So please.
Okay.
What's yours?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this invitation to this roundtable discussion. And I'm very sorry that I couldn't participate this seminar in Lisbon because of COVID infection, but it happens. So as already mentioned, my name is Juha Hakkarainen, CEO or Managing Director of the Finsilva company. Finsilva company is one of the biggest, actually fourth biggest forest owner in Finland. Our forest is mainly located in the central and western part of Finland. We own 135,000 hectare forest and a couple of thousand hectare of water. And actually, because we are, let's say, professional forest owner, so owned by, for example, pension fund companies and owners like that. Actually, the big issue for us is this, let's say, productivity, effectivity, profitability, and sustainability, of course. And this issue, this forest regeneration and forest reproductive material and to developing it, I think it's from our point of view is very essential. How we manage to be effective, how we manage to increase the growth, how we manage to take care of this climate change adaptation and mitigation. So those are those from our point of view, those big issues. And of course, this forest regeneration is from that point of view is a very essential part of it. Also, this, let's say, sustainability, how we manage to take care of those, let's say, challenges from the sustainability, all the sustainability point of view, also from the and the ecological sustainability point of view as well. Actually, we are double certified. We are 100%. The total forest area is in FSC certification as well as the PFC certification in both of those. And actually, we are not in the group certification. We are so big one. So actually, we have our own certification. This is shortly. Our forest, actually, those soils are not so fertilized. Something like 67% of our forest is dominated by pine. 23% is dominated by spruce, and about the 10% birch forest and other hardwood forests. And as I say, in the central Finland, and as a company, our background is there. It's our forest used to be forest of the Metsä Group or Metsäliitto Cooperation Forest, and this company Finsilva formed about 20 years ago, and now it's an independent forest owner, independent company. This is shortly this our background and what we are and how we are doing. Actually, we are in Finsilva. We have our own forest management model based on the research information, mainly from the National Research Institute, LUCA, as well as information from the universities, and based on the, because in Finland, you may know there are, let's say, overall forest management guidelines done by Forest Development Center Tapio, and those our own models are based on those. Let's say there are part of those, all those. So information produced by research organizations and universities as well as the Forest Development Center Tapio. And actually, in this our model, Silva model, this forest regeneration and how we do and what we do and what kind of reproductive material we use. There are quite, let's say, detailed information and detailed where to use and how to use. And in practice, we mainly use those services of the Metsäliitto cooperative. So we use those experts and expertise of this Metsäliitto cooperative. So shortly, this is the situation, but from our point of view, this, let's say, this topic, this forest reproductive material and this forest regeneration, I think it's a very big issue and very big issue from our from the point of view our sustainable forest management and what we do and how we do. Thank you.
Kiitos, Juha. I hadn't told before, I asked the panelists to reflect on 3 questions for focusing the intervention. That was first, which ecosystem services do you think will be paramount in the forest of 2050? Then, which role will have the use and deployment of forest reproductive material in this context? And then the third one, experience or lessons from your country. So the second panelist is Brigitte Bush from the Office National des Forêts of France. Maybe to the speakers. Maximize the speakers.
Hi.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to participate to this discussion. Well, I will try to give you some information and also some question about the 3 questions that you gave me. The first one is about which ecosystem services will be paramount for European forest in 2050. So it's nearly now for forest. And I think that first of all, for forest, which is very important, is the water. Is protection. The water is one of the main product and ecosystem service in France. After is to preserve the 3 levels of biodiversity: the ecosystem, the species, but also genetic diversity. And the genetic diversity, as you know, we need for select. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Yep.
It's okay. We need for select the good material for our forest. The third one is the carbon, and we know that the forest sequestrates carbon, but for the moment, for example, in France, the problem is that we have not the return of the carbon tax for the forest. So that's a very pity, and that's really a problem. And if we are thinking for the future, I think that other point that the forest can give for the society is also thinking about peri-urban forests as more as Iceland of freshness and how this peri-urban forest can contribute to the city and to the society to be better during the hot temperature. And another aim is how to fight against erosion in both in mountain, but also on the coastline, with really also a problem in France. And of course, a lot of co-product on green chemistry, wood fiber, but also mushroom, why not, silvotherapy and things like that. So that's my first, the idea and the things that we want to promote for these ecosystem services in the future in France. I can continue and also ask answer about the roles of the forest reproductive material. In France, we have two different very important species on which we have several results and selection, as you know, maritime pines and Douglas fir. And what is very interesting is that we have a federation of research actors, and also they can contribute an answer to what the manager needs, and that's a very interesting way how to work together. And I want to say that, and it's very nice to have the opportunity to enlighten this. But well, main problem, in fact, at this moment is to have a production, and we have in the same times a change in climate, and this it's very problematic because we would like to have still have a higher production and better quality. But it seems to be very difficult at this moment, and we need to have information from researcher and to have different, more different species, and not only 2-3 species that they are improved. So our need is to increase the number of species. And for the moment, we are working with researcher and manager to increase this number of species. And we have also a recovery plan at this moment in France. We can boost this question too. And the problem also is to be sure that our stock of seed in the seed orchards will be sufficient for plantation, because we have a problem, and the production decrease in certain seed orchards due to the climate, due to the insect. So it's a problem for us. And what I think that the previous person said is that we need to have a better knowledge of genetic of European seed orchards and the condition of youths. We don't know exactly if we are looking to Forematis databases, for example. We don't know exactly how it's composed the seed cards and how we can use these seed cards. On the previous presentation, we see a nice tools, but how to use this at European level. And for the last question, well, I think that we must better know the exact offer of the other European countries, and on classified stands, selected stand, and how they are harvested and which quantity of seed are available, and how we can organize to select, but also to have this seed at European level on research, but also for manager. We are interesting also to have different types of seed cards, which are more diversity seed cards than selected for growth, for example, because we know that we will have some problem in the future, but we don't know which problem exactly. And in same time, I think it's what is very important too is to create seed cards for species threatened by climatic change, fire, or fragmentation. And we know that certain resources at this moment are in danger. So how we manage this and how we do it. Another things which will be very important for us is to share the itineraries on nurseries, for example, to better know about different species we can be used in other countries, but we don't know how to do with these species. More, for example, Quercus species that they are in south part of Europe. And of course, we need new experiments for sharing protocols and data to know first how our species can be planted, and where they can be planted in France and in Europe, but also what will happen in 10 or 20 years. So we need to plant the same experiment in north of Europe, but also in south of Europe. And I think we must share the protocols and the data to contribute together to the better knowledge of forest material. And I have at the end a question concerning assisted migration, plantation and autochthony, because at this moment in France we have some problem with the society, who said that it's not a good solution to plant, is not a good solution to do assisted migration, is not a good solution to import species in France, or even sometimes in a part of France. And I would like to have a return of other country if they have the same problem or not. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you for this exposure. So after the Nordic approach of timber-centered silviculture, often clear-cutting silviculture, we have another approach from France, from the Central Europe, we might say, including other ecosystem services. You might be aware there's the provisioning ecosystem services, the regulating ecosystem services, and the cultural ones. So all of them have been mentioned. It's not only about timber or non-timber forest products or water production or soil protection, but for example, urban forestry. So recreative use of forest, and of course, quantitative genetics from classic breeding is about quantity. So it's easier to measure volume or tree height than satisfaction of landscapes. I like the landscape that was behind Brigitte, because it's the historic landscape. In the horizon, there was this bollarded trees seen for fire production in the background. So the third one, we are going further south, will be Felipe Perez from the ministry in Spain, telling us about the situation in his country, in our country. Please. Or if you like on the center, you can sit like.
Good morning. First of all, I want to thank for this opportunity in this discussion. I work in the Ministry of Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge in Spain, and we coordinate in our unit genetic resources, for genetic resources, conservation programs, and breeding programs in general. As my colleagues mentioned before, I think that for the first question, for which ecosystem services will be the paramount of European forest in 2050, I think some of them has been mentioned. It's very important: water production, fixing soil, fixing carbon dioxide, avoiding desertification, generating resilience against the effects of climate change, of course. That is very important in this issue. The adaptation and the genetic diversity is crucial in our forest, and favoring biodiversity in general and in all levels, in ecosystem level, species and genetically. And as regards products, of course, it's very important timber and pulp, but especially in Mediterranean countries, we have much more kind of products, as we saw in Conceição presentation. In Portugal, it's very important, for instance, cork production, as well in Spain. We have other products like forest fruits, as pine nuts, stone pine, or mushrooms production. Resign is increasing in the last years in our country. I think it's very important, and it's more or less in fashion nowadays, talking about bioeconomy. Bioeconomy is more or less is in discussion in the last year, especially at the European level. There have been many advantages in terms of innovation and development in recent years regarding the bioeconomy. For example, in the textile sector or in building. There are a lot of products that come from the forest. Anyway, it's very important for us, the fixing the rural population, especially in the South Europe countries, because forest activities and forest sector can fix rural population. Especially it's important, there are a lot of agricultural land areas abandoned, and they increase the risk of forest fires or other problems, and forests could contribute to fix this population in the land. And it's very important to support landowners and rural entrepreneurs in order to promote all this rural environment. More or less, it will be the main ecosystem services that I have for the first question. And regarding the second one, which role will improve forest reproductive material? In my opinion, it's going to play a fundamental role, the forest reproductive material, since it is necessary to have a more productive forest, which respond to demands for goods and services of society and industry. As I mentioned before, we call bioeconomy and multiple production of products. But as I mentioned before, we can talk about food, wood, but not only for timber or biomass, but better quality and technical characteristics of the industry needs. Furthermore, in the Mediterranean area, I mentioned before, the products of core, resin, fruits, mushrooms have importance a lot. In this sense, the improved forest reproductive material for retail production and quality of core materials for retail food production, stone pine, nuts, acorns of different species of quercus as elm oak or cork oak, or larger resin producing materials can play a fundamental role. On the other hand, materials at low intensity of breeding, but with the aim of selection for retail resistant to drought, high temperatures, to resistant to pests and diseases, in a context of climate change, will become more and more important in the following years. It is becoming more and more important, as we all know, the number of emerging new pests and diseases in all the world that appear in the recent years in European forests due to globalization. We know that we have serious problems for instance, with bark beetles and mass dieback of coniferous in Central Europe, or due to weakening of masses due to climate change. However, in the south, is increasingly have new diseases and pests forest species, and not only of wood in the Mediterranean area, but also affects other products. We have, for example, problems with pine wood nematode, which have Elenchus, the dieback of cork oak and elm oak due to climate change and Phytophthora cinnamomi. We have, for instance, Leptoglossus with the problem of pine nuts and many new diseases and pests. So for me, it's crucial to improve forest reproductive material, could contribute to minimize all of these problems. And finally, for question 3, how can the deployment of reproductive material be improved? Experiences and lessons from my country. On the one hand, the deployment recommendations, the recommendation of use for the reproductive material in Spain were given years ago for the main forestry species, and they were very useful in reforestation programs, especially in the 19th decade, in the 19th, with reforestation of agricultural lands. However, the first need that we observe is that they should be revised, taking into account the climate change models. This is increasingly demanded by society in general, foresters, landowners, politicians in general. Even European Union Commission itself is giving great importance to this issue, so it should be promoted. The problem is that it is difficult to make general recommendations, as we know, since the predictions are different depending on the species and the scenarios and models that we can use. So we should undertake these studies and this should be the priority in the coming years, regarding the whole issue of deployment recommendations. On the other hand, the genetic breeding programs that began decades ago in Spain, based in many cases on productive traits, currently in many cases do not respond to the real demands of society. For example, regarding technological and quality characteristics required by the industrial sector in the case of timber. Moreover, above all, the need to obtain materials that are tolerant to new emerging diseases and pests has become, as I mentioned before, very important in recent years. Thus, in recent years, some new breeding programs related to these problems have been started in Spain, such as the National Breeding Program for oak and cork oak, with traits tolerant to Phytophthora and drought tolerance. Or another example that we are not know to start is regarding the dieback of alders that are caused by Phytophthora alni, and other programs that have to incorporate these aspects, as in the case of obtaining materials from Pinus pinaster tolerant to nematode, as we know. And new problems will not start appearing, such as dieback, which is not reached the Iberian Peninsula yet. But we must be prepared for it, since it is matter of time that it will arrive. Perhaps we should start working in this evaluation of materials that may be tolerant to the disease. In addition, they are going to gain more and more importance in context of climate change, although without forgetting the traits related to production. The traits related to adaptation are more in Mediterranean area, as is in the case of Spain or Portugal. In this sense, the national plan of seed orchards of pine species that started in Spain in the 80s decade, with an exclusive objective of good production, now should incorporate characteristics more related, traits more related with adaptation, tolerance to drought, extreme temperatures, tolerance to pests and diseases also. Another topic is that was mentioned before is assisted migration. Is very controversial because there are different opinions. What is true is that there is an uncertain, in many cases, there are high degrees of uncertainty, and in my opinion, it is necessary to go in deep with these studies in order to to take some decision about assisted migration. We should also look our countries. We should look at Spain or Portugal. We should look to North Africa even, because central countries can look to the south of Europe, but in a context of climate change, we should even look in North Africa. So it's controversial also. Anyway, in all these topics, it is essential to increase and improve the network of genetic trials that was created in the last years in our country, and of our most important forest species, introducing studies related with adaptation to climate change. Genomic approaches are becoming very important, as we could see in the first parts of this conference, and we should to work on improve these tools. In summary, there are many challenges that arise at this time if we want forests to continue fulfilling the ecological, economic, and social functions that they perform today by 2050 year. Since they must be resilient to climate change and capable of adapt to it, and at the same time continue to host biodiversity, regulate the hydrological cycle, and the climate fix carbon or contribute to bioeconomy. And this is all.
Okay, thank you. So after the outlook from Nordic countries, where the question is how much go north with the first reproductive materials. Now we have heard the position or the outlook from the rearing edge of fossil forest ecosystems. Actually, most of static species distribution models, as Tony said yesterday, it's a concept to be discussed, but most models predict that at the end of this century, forestries will be crumbled up in the northern coast of Spain, and the rest of Spain will be this famous serene Spain that's never on the plane. So after this geographic gradient, now we give place to the last panelist, Christopher Rasio from the European Institute of Planted Forests. So please.
Sorry, here or
the next one.
Thank you for giving me a chance.
Juha has a comment. Can you tell him? Can you tell Juha?
Who is having a comment?
Online.
There is a comment online. Can we read it?
No, he wants to talk.
Someone wants to talk? Okay.
Okay, so sorry I interrupt, but actually thank you for those excellent presentation and overviews. But yes, I fully agree with those ecosystem services which are important after the 2050. But I want to rise up actually this economic function. So as a big issue will be also this food production. We have to place those non-renewable materials like a concrete and steel and so on with the renewable materials like wood. And actually this is also a real big issue because the population will increase, and it means that demand of those products and this consuming will increase as well. So
I should not have given you the floor. You are jeopardizing my talk.
Yeah, but yes, but thank you. I want to mention that we have to keep in mind also this as one big issue of the ecosystem services, this traditional, let's say, traditional wood production as well. Thank you.
Yes, so this is exactly what I wanted to start with. What is the future we want? When we want a carbon-free future, what does it mean? It means that we won't use any more energy from fossil sources. So it means we will have to use some of the renewable sources, and wood is one of these. What do we want when plastic-free future? A plastic-free future means that we need fiber. Fiber, where we can get fiber at the moment for viscose and so on, is from wood. Then what we want? We want concrete-free houses. We want wooden houses because this is where you can save carbon emission. So basically, we have two options. Either you improve your local production, either you import. Then what do we want also? We want to stop importing deforestation. So we will have really a strong tension on the demand. And when you look at the history, when did we have deforestation in Europe? It's when we had either energetic crisis, either war. Does it sound something familiar with you? Okay, so the main issue for me, when I'm asked what is the main ecosystem services, is production services. So of course it is wood, but it is also fiber, it is resin, it is cork. All the products that can substitute the fossil-based product will be highly demanded. And if the international market, the globalization, it goes reducing, we will rely more and more on the European resources. So basically, if you look at the history at the beginning of the 18th century, when we started to get the steam machine, this is when deforestation started. So for me, the challenge, and the big challenge, the main ecosystem services are the production eco-services. Then the question related to what breeding requirement do we have? We will tell, oh, it's easy, you want more wood. No. Actually, when you talk with forester, we are facing such uncertainty that what we want is trees able to cope with all the changes we are facing. Because global change not only means climate change, but it also means more biotic disease incoming, more extreme events. And if we want to secure the wood and the resource production, as I explained before, what we will look at first is how to keep the trees alive. If you have very, very fast growing trees, but all of them dying in 20 years, you are not securing the resources. So resilience for me is a key breeding trait we need to improve. When we talk about the challenge faced by the society and the forester, and what do we need to improve, there is a simple message that we never pass strongly enough, and that the scientific community should voice very strongly, is stop fossil emissions. Because basically we always get the impression that we can adapt. When we saw the map with the extremely at-risk areas in Southern Europe, this means there is places where adaptation is not an option. And this is not clear in the messages we pass. We talk always, we will adapt, we will adapt. No, in some places, we will not adapt. We'll plant cactus, okay? The second thing, there is a big trend, if you look at the European strategy, about naturalness, about let it grow, about no intervention. In the past, when you look at the glaciation rate, all the changes were about 2-3 degrees, and it was taking 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So you had all the natural evolution processes that were engaged and that could cope with this climate change. What is happening now is that we are in situations that never happened before for millions of years. And we are doing that in decades, not thousands of years, but in decades. So people just relying on naturalness and natural process have to be aware of the importance of the change we are facing. What can we do then? Related to that, and it has been explained already by a couple of the speakers, we need to be more European. We need to cross the borders. I'm just managing a small network that is called Rainforest, where we have material tested from north of UK to south of Portugal. But this gives you climate change, a climate range of +6 degrees. And we all know that we're engaged in a process, we're already at +2, you know. So we will go probably for +3. And so we need to cross the border. So what does it mean? We need to harmonize the European legislation. We need to allow the material to cross the border. We need to have more transboundary cooperation. I'm really surprised when I see there is colleagues from Galicia not working with colleagues from Portugal or from France. So this is really something we need. Again, the topic of assisted migration. We really need to improve and coordinate the work between countries. I'm very glad to see what has been done with the planter guide, because this is really the way to proceed. Pull as much as possible the expertise. When you are in a crisis situation, you cannot go alone in your own area. You really need to foster cooperation. We need also to make the most of what is existing already. We all know that there is the Formatis database that is giving an inventory of all the feed chart and all the material we can use, but we don't make the most of that. Basically, we could organize the traceability as it is done in New Zealand when you are planting on the field, when forest owners are planting, when companies are planting. They should have a unique record number and they should be able to trace. Then, when there is a major dieback, when there is a major issue happening somewhere, we will have exactly the traceability of the genetic resources used in these areas. And in New Zealand, they are very, very precise with that. And they have been very quick in making some fine tuning and find recommendation on where to use what. Then basically, we should also push the European Commission and many organizations to reconsider the concept of autochthone and allochthone species or exotic species. I think this is an old-fashioned concept. In such a changing world, we don't even know what is the climax of a given area. So we really need to push forward explaining that and to bring evidences and to improve the messages we have. Then also there is perhaps something more concrete for geneticists, but in the past, all the provenance trials have been tested in the comfort zone of the species, and I think that we need to be more how can I say more pushy, trying things in under the very diverse context and so on. This was the explanation given of the potential area and the distribution area of the species. Perhaps some of the species are not in places where they could survive because we did not bring them there or they could not reach that point. And so I think we have to develop very ambitious pan-European trials and with a wide variety of material and wide variety of climates. Lot of work ahead.
Merci, thank you. Really, there's a lot of there are a lot of ideas to think about. For example, should we try to include North African countries to tackle the wider range of climate conditions? Second, I always remember that Ira France has planted sentinel plots in China from European species to see which Asiatic insects are pesticide attacking. Actually, the provenance trials and the reciprocal trials are not only about climate envelopes, but also about risks, biotic risks, to see if you plant Austrian Pinus nigra in Spain, that it will be eaten by the Procina moth and so on. So that's something to take into account too, that these trials can be also biotic trials to see which biotic agents might be relevant, to see that maybe Phytophthora may attack larynx in Wales or things. Okay, we are nearly done because 12:30 is lunchtime. So if there's some comments from the audience, if not, we might try to make another round, short round for the panelists. But first, I think maybe you can, because it's
This one?
yeah.
Oh, thank you for the presentations. I would like to just know what your opinion on the European forest strategy for the future, because it has totally shifted the strategy. It was much more productive, the last one. This one is much more a conservative approach to silviculture that is close to nature and not touching the forest. And it's quite the opposite that we have been talking here today. Our needs go on the other way. So how do you think that this will impact your forests?
Go ahead. No. I don't have a forest. I think you're the forest.
Perhaps the things it's between the two extreme. If extreme, I think that a forest must also preserve biodiversity, but also to produce wood. So we must, in the same times, do things in the previous project of the European Europe and this one. But I think that is reflect really what we are. What we live at this time in France. So some of them don't want to touch at all the forest and want to preserve all the thing in the forest and don't cut trees and things like that. So it's really what we are living at this moment in France. But I think it's not the true life, in fact. And we need to manage our forest to still have a forest in the future.
Regarding this question, I think we should look at breeding and improve for reproductive material as a solution sometimes for conservation problems, for biodiversity conservation. As for instance, we talk about the problem with dieback of oak and cork oak, for instance, that is becoming very, very important in at least in Spain, and it's an ecological problem and social problem. And breeding could be could contribute for the solution and to restore even some habitats from Nature 2000 and for instance in our case with ulmus, with elms that was disappeared in all Europe because of the dust and disease, and we get improved material resistance to the disease, and I think it is contribution to conservation of this species also and in general. And of course in protected areas maybe there is a problem with that we have to reach a balance between conservation and production, but with a good good planification of the land, I think is totally we can combine this kind of productions more. If we plan all the different lands with more productives and more conservation, I think it's a question of planification and a good planification of the land and on the resources of a country, you know. So I think breeding is a good tool in order to to contribute to conservation and production also, of course.
Yes, I just want to add 2 comments. I agree that what we are lacking is land planning. Actually, there is no more land planning tools, really. And if we look at the strategy, in some pages, basically the strategy advocates for continuous cover closer to nature active. But 2 pages later, it says that we will need more wood for wooden houses, that we need to produce more resources. So I think it's not an issue about what the content of the strategy, but we need to help them to reshape, to rewrite some parts, to say in the range of tools available in forestry, there is from continuous cover to clear cut, and all of them have their place in the landscape. That would be my position.
You can talk.
There is someone who wanted to talk. Joy, you can talk.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I actually, as a summary, I want to point out this importance of sustainable forest management and all those elements and all those dimensions of the sustainable forest management. And in that context, I think that the role of this forest reproductive material is essential. And as already mentioned, what we need is research activities on the national and especially on the international level, this cooperation. And actually the big issue is that the foresters, those professionals on the field, they actually use, and those, let's say, they use those best practices, and they use that information which is produced by researchers. And from the, I think this is very essential issue, that it's only way that we can, let's say, to take care of all those economic those services what the forest and the whole forest sector can produce in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So really, I think it's interesting to write that the forest strategy, the European forest strategy, might have still some bias from, let's say, Russian urbanites, not in my backyard in this. So I wouldn't share what I don't want it from my forest or from my own forest. So for sure, I think it might be helpful to think that maybe we can help them to develop better this discourse. Okay. I'm sorry, but it's lunchtime. I think you are sorry too, but we must finish this discussion now, but maybe during lunch we can. My thanks to the panelists to be available online. Thank you.
Pues no estoy teniendo nada, no estoy teniendo nada. Trabajo.
Sorry. Lunch is a big issue as climate change.
¿Quieres de la asociación de la ONG?